All right, let us begin. First of all, thank you all for joining us. This is a very important meeting because it represents a transition for this committee in a number of different ways. One, we're going to lose Martin as our day-to-day liaison.
Not going far.
But he isn't going far. And I wanted to introduce Camilla to everyone who's going to be taking over. I'll give her a few minutes later to introduce herself in more detail, but she will now be taking over as the liaison of the committee. Two of our members got promoted to the ATC board, Arish and Kirsten, and both of them asked me to thank all of you that have been part of this journey with them for being so helpful and cooperative. They really appreciated their time on the DAC, and they look forward to interacting with us in their new roles with the new ATC board. And in that respect, we have with us the chair of the ATC board, David Kaplan, who will be this is his first time seeing the DAC in action. And we appreciate him being here and filling us in on some items as we go further in this meeting. Beyond that, I would like to proceed to the roll call, if we may. Camilla, if you will call the roll.
I just go by the names, right? I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name, sorry. So Jim Dorham?
Yep.
Salma Gurcho?
She is out on family leave today, so she will not be joining us.
Abdel Alubi? Ibeth Jiang?
Present.
She's virtual, okay. Naufal Kulam? Is that right?
Yep, he's not here right now.
Okay. Jason Koenig? Jim Alaskan?
Meslanka, yeah,
Alaskan.
here.
Matthew McManus? Bonnie O'Day?
Here.
Ross Simons?
Here,
Eric Adams?
present.
Marcos Bernier?
Here.
Nathaniel how do you pronounce your last name? Cartagena.
Yes, here.
And Eric Van Horn? That's everyone.
I believe we have a quorum so that we can proceed. So let me first introduce our three new members and give them up to 2 minutes to sort of introduce themselves. I'll start first with Eric, and then we'll go to Marcos, and then we'll go to Nathaniel. So Eric, please.
Good evening, committee. My name is Eric Adams. I live on the west end of Alexandria, specifically Landmark. I've been riding the Dash bus probably since 2021 on a regular basis. Two lines come right by my building, the 30 and 35. I think it's a great service. I'm here to help in any way I can to make it a better service.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Marcos?
Hi, I'm Marcos. I haven't lived in Alexandria for a long time. I moved here in July of last year, but coming from the state of Oklahoma, I've lived in a place where you drove everywhere. Well, I think the way that I characterize it is that you grow up in your car. So it's something that's a necessity and there is no alternative. I mean, unless you want to walk for 50 minutes at a time to get groceries, there's no real alternative. So moving here to Alexandria, and I live in Braddock. I live next to Braddock Road Metro. Moving here, I was kind of exposed to something that was completely unfamiliar to me, except, you know, from vacations and stuff like that, right? You know, and I was surprised. I guess I was surprised. And I got super excited about it. I don't drive anymore. I got rid of my car. I take the bus everywhere. I ride the train everywhere. Granted, I don't work in Alexandria. I work in Roslyn, and that's where I came from today. But the fact that it was so smooth to come all the way down here from Roslyn, from my office, just with the public transportation system that this region has developed over the past 70-ish years is fantastic to me. And I've been obsessed with how those systems get that good, how they're graded and how they get that good in the first place. And so I want to be part of that.
Thank you. Nathaniel.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. Really excited to be here. I'm Nathaniel Cartagena. I originally grew up in Racine, Wisconsin, or southeastern Wisconsin, kind of similar to what Marco said. You kind of grow up in your car. In fact, a lot of the winter, because there's not very strong public transit, you can't even really walk anywhere. It's very cold winters. So you really have a very different lifestyle than you have here. My wife and I moved here about 5 years ago, and we had 2 cars when we moved here, tons of stuff. We got rid of one of the cars. I tried to get rid of both, but she fought me to hang on to the other one. I got rid of my car, I guess is what I'll say ultimately. I lived on the West End for a while. That's where I first started using a lot of WMATA services, the bus to get to Pentagon City and then the metro in. We lived in Carlisle, really nearby here for a while. And we live in Potomac Yards, technically across Richmond Highway, just into Lynn Haven. So I use the 33, the 34, the 36. Metro is now officially open, a little late, but glad to have it really. But I've been really excited. I mean, I think for us, we are, for myself, I'll speak for myself, really interested in a concept that I saw when I first got here, which is the car-free diet. You know, I biked here from my home in Potomac Yards. I was going to take the bus, but I didn't have quite enough time, so I just hoofed it as quick as I could. But anyway, you know, we're really looking to reduce carbon emission. I think public transit plays a key role because it's really convenient, and you get kind of the what do they call it? The kilograms of pollution per mile traveled per passenger can be significantly reduced through public transit while still giving a very high sense of satisfaction for your community. You also get to meet people. You know, I think a key example is 2 weeks ago, we took the 34 to the St. Patrick's Day parade. So I love the Dash. We use it a lot. I've got a 1-year-old son who rides it with me. It's a great experience.
Thank you. Thank you all for agreeing to serve. Josh and I went through a fairly extensive list of potential candidates that were offered to us. We each interviewed these candidates separately, and then we had a meeting to discuss who we thought were the best candidates to serve. And you're now seeing these 3 individuals as our best choices to serve this committee and hopefully Dash well into the future. So again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your contributions. So in the spirit of transition, we also now have finally 2 years plus. Am I right about
Not that
that?
way. I think it's a little over a year.
It
14
seems-
months, we'll call
It
it.
seems that way,
Seems that way,
14
yes.
months. We now have a new director of marketing and communications for Dash. And Camilla will take over the work that Whitney had done for us initially before she went off to North Carolina and to greater, better things for her. And she will become our day-to-day liaison, taking the burden off Martin so he can return to his full-time work of thinking about planning and other activities for Dash. So Camilla, if you take a couple of minutes, as these gentlemen did, to introduce yourself to the committee, it would be great. Thank you.
So it's really nice to meet everyone. This is my 4th week with Dash, so it has been a lot of work the last few weeks. I used to work for the Department of Transportation and Environmental Services. I worked there for 3.5 years. I was the senior communications officer and managed all the media requests, social media, website, meetings, a lot of community outreach. So I used to work with Dash frequently when I was back at TES. I worked with Martin, with Raymond, and with Whitney when she was here. So very excited to now move to Dash. And since I work for TES, I do have a better understanding of some of the transportation projects that are going on with the city and with other things happening throughout Alexandria. I am originally from Colombia, Bogota, so I'm used to public transportation, no cars. I used to just take VRT. And being here, that's why when we moved to the US, we decided to come to a city where you can actually just not use cars and just be able to travel with public transportation. So I use Dash. I used to live in Crystal City and now I moved to Alexandria, so I use it to come to work and everywhere.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We are going to move now into the heart of our agenda. We have a couple of very important discussions to have this evening, but the first is going to focus on the budget and the current state of the budget with City Council. And joining us for this discussion is our distinguished ATC Board Chair, David Kaplan. And I'll turn it over to you, David, to talk both budget, but also to talk a little bit about the ATC strategic plan, which is different than what we're going to talk about in a few minutes.
Sure.
But so that you have a sense of what the company has been thinking about strategically and how that affects the budget as well. So in whichever order you prefer to take it in, David, appreciate it.
And Ross, how long, I know in terms of the agenda, how long do you want me to speak for?
10 minutes?
Okay,
Be great.
I can certainly do that. And I'm also going to defer, I know Raymond is here to talk also about the kind of board strategic plan. Martin gave me the acronym BSP before I came in here to keep it straight from the ATSP, because that was largely a staff-driven process, although I think since last time I was here, the vision and the mission that came out of that are now more on plaques on the wall, really to remind staff about kind of that process. But I'll start with the budget. I know some of you, but I'll just introduce myself as well, and just maybe for some of you who are new may want to understand kind of the board of directors role and kind of what we do and how we fit into the organization. So I'm David Kaplan. I've lived in the city for 20 years, and I actually started. I was in the Meridian building when I first moved, so 1200 First Street. I don't know if that's your building. Okay, I was on the 7th floor in that building. That was 20 years ago, but I picked it because it was right next to a metro station, and a lot of Dash service as well. I don't drive, and so I have depended greatly on mass transit, so very concerned about buses. I actually met Jim Maslenka when I was initially concerned about some budget cuts back in the Great Recession to Dash, and was trying to make sense of City Council was working through a huge budget gap they had to fill. And I remember meeting with Jim and the mayor and talking about kind of ways we could kind of plug some of that service and what was necessary to do. And that kind of got me very interested in kind of serving on the board. And this group didn't exist at this point. And so as I was kind of going to board meetings, I was noticing that we had a lot of people who had a lot of great skill sets and a lot of passion for serving the city, but we didn't have a lot of riders at the time who served on the Dash board, with the exception then when Justin Wilson had left council and joined the board of directors, he was kind of the only kind of regular rider that was there. And it showed up in some of the conversations they were having, sort of been looking at service really from more numbers than kind of understanding kind of the overall connections and what people were trying to do. And especially some of our night and our weekend service, not terribly well used, but really lifeline service for people. And so I had very much wanted to join the board in order to kind of be part of those conversations. And so I went on the board in 2011, and so I've been on there now, I guess that's 13 years. And I guess I became the chair in 2018, and among the current board members, I'm the longest. We have a few of us who've been there for 5 years or more, and then we've actually had a lot of, as Ross mentioned, we have 3 new board members who joined, 2 that came from this group, and so we have a lot of new voices on the board. We have a lot more people who are regular riders and really looking at different parts of the city and different routes, and I think that's made us kind of more effective also as advocates as well, because we understand kind of some of the impacts of the service. The board of directors, so Dash is the Alexandria Transit Company actually owns Dash. It's a nonprofit corporation that the city chartered in 1984 when they created Dash, and it was a way for the city to own the buses and what the facilities, and this being I think the 3rd Dash has been in, but to kind of get away from having city council make all the decisions. Okay, this route is going to go here, we're going to charge this fare at this time period, and sort of giving it to a corporate board of directors that could then make those decisions. It would sort of insulate city council from having to make some of those decisions directly, and so that has been the structure since Dash existed. The man Bill Hurd, who the building is named for, was the founding chair of Dash, and he had also set up this same type of organization in Richmond, Lynchburg, and Roanoke all have it. I know he'd worked on at least a couple of those systems, but he lived in Alexandria, so he was kind of tapped into create Dash and the ATC structure. So the board of directors, so we're a corporate board, we're appointed by city council to 1-year terms. We just had our stockholders meeting last week. So city council once a year actually appoints the board of directors, appoints the external auditor. If you own shares in kind of a public company and you get your proxy every year, it's sort of the same kinds of questions that are on that kind of form. And then the city council, we actually set the policies for Dash. Now, as we get into the budget discussion, we'll find out we have only but so much we can work with because we get our money from city council to operate the system, especially in the absence of fares. And so what city council does is very really drives what we can do, but we are the ones who ultimately make the decision. The general manager also works for the board of directors, so he actually reports to us when our former general managers, some have been around a long time, remember Sandy Modell, who's a longtime general manager of Dash. When she retired, our board actually did the search process to find Josh and bring him here, and every year we do performance evaluation for him and kind of determine his employment agreement and compensation. Everybody else who works for Dash works for a we have a management company as well that kind of handles a lot of which used to handle a lot of the kind of running of some of the service and actually handling certain functions within Dash. But one thing that the management company still does for us is they actually own the corporation that pays everybody else, and that's called TMA, or Transit Management of Alexandria. So it's an interesting structure, and it's kind of, especially for people who are kind of new to Dash, you kind of look at it as a city department, but we are different in some ways, and sometimes that's even educating newer city council members, for example, about kind of how that all works. So that's kind of a very quick explanation of how the board fits into it. We meet once a month, either here or at City Hall typically. And, we have functions like setting the budget for the organization, the kind of the strategic direction, as I said, managing the general manager. But we don't get into a lot of what you guys get to do, which is some of the fun stuff, which is actually giving input to staff on, basically how should service look? How do we do our marketing? Are we being effective? Are we being able to serve people who have disabilities? We often have a lot of opinions on this, especially as we have more people who ride regularly, but it's really this group that has the ability to kind of influence a lot of those kind of staff decisions that are going on about how the Dash service should look. Josh set this up a few years ago. He run something similar in Lynchburg and found a great chair in Ross, a great vice chair in Jim, and you guys have really, who've been on this a while, have just gone and done great things in terms of determining what you want to spend your time on and the kinds of advice that you want to give. And so, when Josh approached us about setting this up, I said to him, I want to make sure that people feel that it's a good use of their time and that they feel that, they're have opportunities to give meaningful feedback and to engage in the Dash service and feel a sense of ownership over it. And I think that even comes through in your logo, which I saw for the first time while I was walking past the parking signs for the parking area. I hadn't seen your logo before, but I like that because it really talks about we who ride it own the transit, and we need to ensure that it's working for the city. So that's, I think, enough for introduction. I'll kind of go into budget now. So we've spent most of our time talking. So Dash has two components to its budget. We have an operating budget, we have a capital budget. Operating budget is what actually pays to run the system. Capital budget are all basically the assets that we need. So mostly buses and things here at the facility and like that, the kinds of big property items that we purchase. We have spent most of our time dealing with the operating budget this year. So we are fare-free. We're in our fourth and final year of a grant that the city got to run fare-free buses. So the city in FY25 will be the fourth year, has to remain fare-free, but the city must pay for it entirely themselves. If they don't, they have to give back a lot of money, much more money than we would collect in fares, all the money we got in the last 3 years in state support to help run free fares. So I know there's been some discussion within the community. Sometimes I go on newspaper, Alex Now, and I read comment boards, people say, oh, well, we could solve budget problems if Dash wasn't fare free. Well, that's a discussion for the future, but for next year, the city is going to have to continue to be fare free. In terms of service, we're looking at basically our city manager had given Dash a huge increase in our budget. And Part of that was because of the extra money we'd have to come up with no more state support for fare free. And part of that is just compensation increases that our employees had received under their collective bargaining agreement that they have. And so the city manager said, I can do that, but I want you to come up with $385,000 in reductions to your budget. And so 82 cents of every dollar we get in the operating budget goes to basically running the buses that are on the street, the operator, the fuel, and all the ancillary costs involved in the service. So we looked at the remaining 18% of our budget, and we were able to come up with about $200,000 in reduction. So we got a little over halfway there. And then we said, okay, well, if we've got to send up a service reduction, we're going to pick the service that has the least number of rider impact. And that's a route called the 104, which is a peak only route that operates between Braddock Road and the Pentagon, basically going up through some parts of Delray, Rosemont, Northridge, and about 3/4 of Park Fairfax. Martin's bringing up a map that has that route. So Cameron Mills from Braddock, and then running through on Valley, Martha Custis, then gets on 395 up to the Pentagon. We weren't eliminating the route entirely, but it only runs every 30 minutes now, and the route would be every 60 minutes as it would remain. And you think about if that's a service that almost everybody's either transferring to or from Metro Rail at either end of the route, that's not going to be a very attractive service, because if your train is late and you're going to be waiting an awfully long time at either Braddock or the Pentagon, or be very late for work. And so it's not ideal, but it was kind of the kind of least pain point in terms of filling gaps, but the ridership will be very, very low on that route. I know staff there's a formula in it that you all use, and I think it come up with 35 to 40% rider loss, but these are almost entirely choice riders. They're people who are commuting into DC, or maybe even work at the Pentagon, who probably have other options. And so it could be a very serious and significant loss. So we went to City Council and we asked them to consider adding money back as they go through what's called their add delete process, where they make adjustments to the city manager's budget, and we're asking for $180,000 to close that gap. There does seem to be significant support among city council members to do that. In order to add money back, they have to actually do what's called a budget memo, where a council member has to ask a question about what would it cost to do this, or can we do this, and what would be the impact of that. And so we actually do have a budget question regarding this service, restoring it. I think that came from Councilwoman Gaskins. So staff is working on that now. And so that, by answering that question, that will allow council members to consider whether they want to add that service back. I know the vice mayor has asked me about that service continuing, and there does seem to be support in the council to do that. It's not a significant ask. The other part of the budget that we have at, Martin, am I going too deeply into the ATSP, or would you prefer that? Okay. Okay, because Martin and I, part of our Alexandria Transit Strategic Plan will also be looking at new service investments. I'll touch on them briefly, and then Martin can kind of go through the details when he does his portion. When we did the new Dash network, that kind of reinvented Dash routes in 2021, at the same time we made changes to the fare policy, we had 3 portions of that we wanted to do in FY22, so sort of when we rolled out the network, that remained unfunded. We had 5. Council's added back 1 in each year since each fiscal year since we started fare free. So the 3 that are left, our top option that we want is to improve Eisenhower Avenue service. And so this is the line 32 that you see that runs from Landmark, Pickett, Van Dorn Street Station, and then comes down Eisenhower to Carlisle and King Street Metro. Outside of rush hour it's a 30-minute service, but outside of rush hour, it's 60-minute headways. That's midday, evening, and Saturday and Sunday, which basically was when that route was called the AT7 before the new Dash network. Basically the same service they had before. So if this is primarily your Dash route, you're probably happy about free fares, but you're saying, what's all the big hubbub about, improving the network? I have the same service that I had before. So we want very much to improve it. Now you can see that's a lot bigger dollar amount than restoring, headways on the line 104. It's $850,000. But that we asked council about that, and there is a budget question. I think Councilman Gaskin's question also covered what the supplementals would, and I addressed this when I spoke to council on Saturday. I spoke specifically about this route being our top priority, and then there are 2 others that are in there as well.
So that's for this year?
we'd like to get it.
Proposed for this year.
We'd like to get it. It's not in the city manager's budget, obviously
Right.
he reduced, but it's something we've asked for that's unfunded. Martin will kind of go through how that's stacked in the strategic plan so that, you know, if we get the funding, then how we would kind of slice it into the different options. Priority 2 is line 34, which is Lee Center through Old Town, North Old Town, Slaters, and then the Route 1 Transit Way up to Potomac Yard Metro. On Sunday, that route runs hourly. We want to make it every 30 minutes, and that would be $150,000. So it's possible, you know, if council wants to do something that we might get that one instead, because that would be a much lower ask, or we could get some portion of the 32, like maybe we could get, you know, Saturday, or we could get midday service on it, because they could also do the 32 in slices. And then the last one, which is the biggest item, is line 31, which is the Old Town Circulator between Braddock and King, and that's the one that goes up King Street to Northern Virginia Community College. We want to make that it's every 30 minutes, kind of midday, evening, weekend. We want to go to every 15 minutes, basically coming through Old Town. Because I experience this a lot, because I go to Chinkapin on weekends, and so I live in Old Town. So I will, you know, use the weight room, or I'll swim, and then I want to get a bus, and I don't have to wait too long for a bus, but every other bus stops at King Street Metro and doesn't, and I just have to wait to transfer to go on. This route has a lot of demand and high ridership, and we'd like to kind of get all of that to be very consistent, where all of the buses do the exact same thing and serve the destinations, as many people are, if they're riding the bus eastbound, they are continuing past King Street Metro, but that's a $1.1 million ask. And that's kind of our lowest tier priority, because the service there is pretty good, and transferring at King Street, although not ideal, is not, you don't have that long to wait most of the time you're making those transfers. So we've kind of prioritized that as being, yes, that's important, it's part of the network, but kind of being kind of our lowest tier priority. So I've talked a lot. I'll stop if you have any questions, or we can go on. I'm going to be very quick on the strategic plan, but I just wanted to see if anybody had questions.
Let's see if there's some questions here. Any of the new members have questions first? Yvette, you're online here. Do you have a question related to?
Maybe I could, I could ask a question. I guess we have experienced a few rounds of, I guess, sustained financial stringency over the past fiscal years. And it sounds like we're playing catch up to the ATV plans here. I guess, how would the board or Dash, you know, think of it long term, and how do we meet the ATV goals with the financial climate in mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the things when we've talked to council is we've looked at the 2 improvements they made already. They did a line 30 improvement 2 years ago, which is the Duke Street line, and then they did a Sunday improvement on line 33, which is King Street to Potomac Yard. When you show them just how much the ridership has changed on those segments, it's incredible, especially the line 33. And we're seeing over 100, it was over 100% on Sunday, wasn't it? And so you show them that, and that investment has a lot of impact in terms of what it can do. So that's one way we talked with them. When the ATV was done, we had to be kind of cost neutral. So we were sort of taking lines and moving them around, but we didn't have kind of a larger pie to work with. So there were some routes that had some impact, and actually 104 was one of them, where that used to be, well, pre-COVID, it was a 20-minute headway route. It had become 30 because of just very limited people going into the office. And then we sort of kept that as we went into doing the ATV, and made some other adjustments as well, where we took some service away. I mean, Jim, I know, worked hard on the line 102 along Seminary. That was an area where we looked at, do we want to make, you know, change, do we take service away? And the community was like, no, we can't lose all of it, but we were trying to plug in those the areas that had the most need. We have some grant money that has paid for some of the service improvements. The lines 35 and 36 are paid for through the I-395 Commuter Connections Program, and we have every 2 years have to apply for that money, and that has allowed us to have a huge amount of service. Now, we applied again for a second round or third round of funding this.
We're now in our third round. We're now the AT1 plus. And the
Oh,
AT9.
okay. Yeah, and this year, there were more projects that had applied for that money, and we were actually a little concerned that we wouldn't get either. I think, you know, we'd hoped we'd get at least one of the routes. We were very glad we got both of them, because they have a lot of return. But when you looked at how much service you'd lose if we didn't have those grants, it would be a lot, and that would probably be, you know, it would be hard to kind of plug locally. So we look for grants. We look to have, you know, segments that are gonna have very high rate of return so that city council can see that this is a great investment. But, you know, at the end of the day, you have to kind of look and say, if we kind of look at transit almost as a utility or a public good, there's certain just only limited sources that can fund it, and you have to kind of figure out, do we as a community have the commitment to have the transit system that we want? We do have some improvements that are part of a 2030 version of the ATV or New Dash network, and so those are kind of more of the, I don't want to say pie in the sky, but more very ambitious ideas for the kind of the future of what transit should look like. But we had intentionally made those later because we wanted to basically do something that we thought was reasonable to present to council in a more constrained fiscal environment. The only other thing I'll say is that, you know, I think council's looking at a potentially up to 4-cent tax rate increase on the property tax rate. If, you know, I think that surprised some people because, you know, they haven't changed the tax rate in some time, and certainly during an election year that could have interesting implications. But, you know, one of the things that if they do that, certainly there would be more money potentially for, a lot of that I think has to do with schools, but there would be more money potentially for some of the transit improvements as well. And we would want to make our case that those really go hand in hand in kind of helping people.
So one of the issues that this committee began a dialogue on, we didn't get that far, but we at least begun the dialogue, is the Eisenhower corridor. Because one only has to go down that corridor to recognize the growth rate that is occurring there. So you have, on the one hand, you can make the case to council, well, there's huge demand now on these particular lines because there are people there already. But you haven't tested yet, for example, in the Eisenhower corridor, if you provide that service, what the demand would be, which I think many of us think would be considerable. So I sort of feel strongly that this is an area, at least where the DAC probably needs to weigh in a little bit on that particular line. The question that I posed to everybody sitting around the table here is how best to do that. Do we want to go in for the entire, it's a large chunk of money, I grant you that, $850. But do we want to do this in a way to encourage council at least to begin to do it in segments so that eventually, hopefully in a couple of years, the entire line is in place for what we need to do? Or do we go in for the entire 850 and risk conceivably damaging perhaps other priorities? I just put that on the table for discussion. Thoughts? Jim, I know you have thoughts.
Well, first one's, and in full disclosure, I sit on the Eisenhower West Landmark Van Dorn Implementation Advisory Group. So I look at all developments going on west of the Holmes Run to the city border in the southwest corner, so which this line would serve. So the first comment I'll make is that when we refer to it as the Eisenhower Corridor line, and I absolutely agree. In addition to the new homes, I think it's Tri Point next to the Victory Center that's coming online this year with hundreds of homes. The Victory Center itself, something like a 10-story building, is going to undergo conversion from office building to residential. I think that's up to the Planning Commission maybe this month or so. So I agree with that development, but I want to also emphasize in terms of segments that from Landmark Mall, the 32 runs through that Holmes Run Parkway area and down through Van Dorn, which is a very dense part of the city with a lot of low income and minority families who depend on the bus. And right now, I don't know about the rest of you, but you know, I am served by a bus line that only comes every 60 minutes during the day outside of peak. And that's not very helpful. And so the proposal for the 850 would be to get that to 30 minutes for that entire quarter. So I just want to make sure you think of this line, the two pieces, and there's valid reason to support the whole enchilada, if you will. With respect to, I actually had a question about whether Martin or David know if the budget question was asked, will allow staff to generate an answer that says, you know, here's what it costs to do this, and oh, by the way, if you wanted to do pieces, here, Martin, do you know if the answer is gonna address the two pieces? Or,
You guys got this
I have
question?
not seen the question
Okay,
yet, so
okay.
full disclosure, I've not, but I would imagine that we'll find a way to put that in if that's the strategy we want
Yeah.
to go with. Just
So
because we want to be clear that, you know, if they're not gonna be able to fund the full 850, there may be other options. Because this has been clearly identified as a top priority by our board. We've heard it from you for over, in the whole DAC group for over a year. We know this is a very important part of the city, but we're not.
I'd asked Martin, I think over a year ago.
Oh, yeah,
about
you've been on this
splitting
for,
it up,
yeah.
to try and get a smaller chunk, so one more comment on the taxing piece. I've talked to a few council members about the tax, and they need about 2% or a little more than that to fund sort of the minimum schools, teacher pay raises. And the 4% gives them the opportunity to fund other, you know, health and human services, support for low-income families, other and transit. Everyone I've talked to sees an opportunity with this increase to, yes, take care of schools, but also continue to make progress on transit. So I think, yeah, I'd be favoring something that says we support, you know, the ATC board's request for a line 32 increment, but if that can't be met, at least funding a portion of that this year. Kind of way
Right.
I throw that off.
And we also have this other issue of the budget cut about the matching grants as well, right? That we need to address too. So would somebody speak to that as well? Because that's a little worrisome as well.
We had some discussion at our board meeting, and I think we're last week, and I should also mention, our board is a mix of residents and actually now has 3 city staff members on it. So Kendall Taylor, who's the city's director of finance, sits on it. Arthur Wicks, who works in OMB, the part of the city that does the budget, is the capital improvement program managers on it, and Hillary Orr, who's the deputy director of TNS over transportation. And so in talking last week with Kendall and Art, I think we're less concerned about that, because I think it just, I think it was more of kind of a coordination communication issue with the city in terms of the timing of when the grant's going to be awarded. So I actually didn't even address that in my testimony on Saturday, but I think it was in probably some budget talking points that you might have seen before if you were reading our board packet.
Yeah.
But I can explain. Basically, we have a grant that we applied for that involves transit information signs that are actually being piloted on a couple of buses now from the state. There's a local match for that, and so and actually a couple other grants that we applied for at the state as well. I think our intern the intern program at Dash is there.
Through vision, it's a camera that can see through the pillars.
Okay, and then the cameras for pedestrian safety, drivers identify blind spots, and so the grants are actually awarded potentially from the state late April, May. I mean, you're the one. Maybe I should just let you. You guys spoke about this in the board meeting, so why don't I let you guys? Why don't I let you give them information on the grant?
Hi, my name is Raymond Nguyen, the Chief Infrastructure Development Officer at Dash. So just a bit of a background on this particular subject. Every single year we apply for state grants to fund a various array of programs, and typically a small handful of demonstration programs and or capital assistance, something of that nature. We rely on it to fund and support a ongoing internship program year after year as well. Sometime in the past recent couple of years, the city has kind of changed the way they've done budgeting, and due to that transition and just the technicalities and the mechanisms, somehow ended up that our specific line item for the local match for these particular grants, which has always been an existing item, has been was isolated and memorialized during a particular year, but was actually at a lower than usual. So moving forward from that, every single year when we build our budget, we identify what is the appropriate local match that we need for these particular grant programs, and any net increase in numbers is treated as a supplemental. So it's pretty much a victim of crossfire, just a technicality change of how the city does budgeting in relation to how we do our budgeting. Long story short, it's probably something, again, with the feedback that we got from the city's budgeting team is just something we likely should be able to navigate this, and it's much less of a concern at this point at the budgeting level when the time comes. So the grants, they are announced and awarded sometime between May and June, and at that point when they're a real cost with the real need for these local matches, that is the point when we re-engage with the budgeting team and determine the local matches and just source those funds for these grants.
What Art and Kendall on our board, having the city staff perspective, just said is basically they're treating us more like other city departments are treated, whereas we would basically be able to kind of, these grants that we were almost certain to get year to year, we're able to, as we went through the budget, just kind of count that as part of our services already. So that's why we had initially raised that as a budget issue, but it does seem that the city will be able to meet that. And these grants provide a great rate of return on the money that we put up locally. So yeah, so we aren't as concerned about that. And I think the line 104 reduction, we're almost certain to get back. The only unfortunate thing about it is it put us a little bit more on a defensive mode instead of talking mainly about the unfunded supplements that we wanted, which we've had the luxury to do in prior years when we haven't been kind of defending service. There also was a budget memo question, maybe you guys, and I think also went in on Friday with the 104 one, asking about line 103, if they went back to 20 minutes, that's the other peak period service Braddock to the Pentagon, which goes up Russell Road and does part of Park Fairfax. And so that line has a little bit higher ridership than the 104. And so Councilman McPike asked what it would cost if we went back to 20-minute headways on that. And that was not something that we had asked for in this fiscal year. It's in our kind of future plans for the following year to ask for, but it's possible we could get funding for that as well.
All right, other comments on the budget?
Just
Questions? Go ahead, Jim.
a comment as far as the Route 32. One of the things that I'm sort of thinking about is that, you know, the idea of if we do have to say chop off the Eisenhower from the 800 grand to something smaller, another option might be to go from Van Dorn Metro, or even if there's a way of turning around a bus beyond the Victory Center and whatnot, and going all the way to Landmark. But you know, I think what's going to happen though is that there's likely to be a major traffic transportation center happening at Landmark, which is going to be a good driver, as well as the new residential things at the Victory Center and adjoining areas. So if we don't get it this year, I think that in future years, at least that portion of that group may be worthwhile looking at. So that's kind of my thought.
Any other comments here? What I want to emphasize here is there is a work session on the Dash budget on April 3rd, as I recall. And what I would like to see is there a consensus amongst this committee to do what we have done in previous years, which is to write a letter to council from the point of view of the riders, of us representing the riders, to advocate for restoration of the 104 and at least the line 32.
I will so move that we write a letter that supports the restoration of Route 104 and a supplemental request for line 32. You can maybe put some details in.
All right. Are there discussion before we vote here? Yvette, anything?
No, I'm in favor. I'd like to second that.
All right, anybody else?
I'm generally in favor, but I mean, this is my first time here, so I don't know what kind of data we generally have. I was actually pretty curious about the analytics side of what this looks like. Like, do we know what the ridership looks like, how far people go on it? What the transport. Okay, good.
I have some data here that I can kind of go through if that's helpful.
It would be interesting. I mean, I'm supportive. I mean, I know I used to have a friend that lived out there, so I used to take those buses.
You want to just quickly go through, and I'm sorry to interrupt, David, your piece here, but I think it's important here to get this nailed down.
And you were specifically interested in 32 or the 104?
No, I
or-
was specifically thinking in general, but then to
Okay.
look at the 32, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, before I dive into any weeds here, just kind of at a higher level, staff has a lot of data that we're able to pull in terms of the ridership, in terms of, the utilization cost, all that. And then we also have a lot of demographic data that we can pull, especially since we've now done a customer survey. So we know not only who's using the bus, but also kind of the background, the communities that we're serving, and we can kind of factor that in as well as some of the decision-making process. So what we do each fall is part of the development of the city's budget process is come up with reductions, which usually don't make it this far, but in this case, we have been asked to bring one through. And then we also have our supplemental requests. The supplemental requests have largely been consistent over the last few years because they're guided by our longer term Alexandria Transit Vision Plan, the ATV that was adopted by the board back in 2019. And that's kind of shaped our thinking on a lot of things in terms of what we're trying to advance on certain routes. And as Chairman Kaplan mentioned, there's several routes that are not up to what we had recommended as part of our 2022 plan, and here we are in 2024. So we've kind of been focusing on those improvements, and we do have some metrics that we look at as we consider how to prioritize those improvements against each other. We look at boardings. You can see that line 32 has about 67,000 annual net increase in boardings. If we were to make the improvements listed here, that's based on staff analysis, based on the current boardings per revenue hour, how many additional revenue hours we'd be adding, and some additional kind of analysis based on that. We also have equity category where we look at the low income percentage and minority percentage of the residents that are served by the route. So we can kind of see that, while you have line 32 is 54% minority, I would say it's actually probably higher than that, especially on the west end of the route. And then 9% low income. And then you, by comparison, have like the 104, which is, higher income, only 5% low income along that route and only 27% minority. So there are some equity considerations as well. And then just the impact. What are we changing? How is that going to affect the riders? I think in terms of the 104, the best example that I've heard from riders is the folks at the Pentagon when they're coming back at night. Their train, they just missed that the train just misses the bus. And they've got a 59-minute wait till the next 104 coming if we enact this change. So that's kind of the actual impact, the day-to-day impact that riders would feel. And then the last one, which is kind of covered here, but the efficiency. So we figure out what the impact would be on riders and the cost. And why am I not able to get that out of there?
Yeah, the 32 is the most cost effective, but I don't remember the number.
Right. Yeah, but basically, it measures the efficiency, and if you're if the impact of ridership is kind of worth the extra increase in funding. Oh, you know what it is? It's the wrong thing. That would be why. Sorry, but so yeah, there you go. So lower is a greater rider impact. So the 12.69. So so compared to the other proposed supplemental increases, that would be more bang for your buck in terms of adding more riders at a lower cost.
Question, this matrix is in the ATSP document, right?
It is, yes. So that's kind of the service planning framework that we've used. There's also, going back to the equity for just a moment, there's also Title VI requirements. Title VI is a federal program that we're required to follow, where we analyze all of service changes in terms of the impact it would have on different communities, particularly the lower income and minority. And we have to just make sure that if we make a change, it does not have a disproportionate impact on those communities. And that's what we do with some of these numbers as well. And none of the supplemental improvements would trigger that Title VI threshold. So that's a good thing. Does that kind of give you some insight into the process?
It does. I'm curious to know if this is like what the full suite of analytics is. Not to get, I know that's not what our point is here today, but I'm curious about that. I feel like it would be interesting to know more about the ridership. I think you could get some areas of focus if you knew more.
Yeah, so we have also stop level boardings, time of day. We can, we have a whole host we have a platform called Hop Through, which allows us to visually show like where the boardings are occurring. So if there's like a certain trip that we want to look at, or a certain time of day, or a certain section of a route, in this case, we could look at line 32 and say, okay, what are the boardings on this end of the route? And does that warrant kind of the additional service? So yeah, we have tools that can do that. And I can bring some of those back if that's something that the board would be interested in, or the committee would be interested in seeing.
I think what Jim was saying earlier, if you were to, get it in segments, it would be really helpful. But I think we would ask for more and take what we get for a little while.
Yeah, and to that point, Jim kind of mentioned it, but between Landmark and Van Dorn is probably the most likely scenario if we were to have a short trip. We generally, for simplicity's sake, we try not to have short-term trips just because like we have with the 31, it creates confusion, it creates additional transfers. It's harder to understand for people that aren't familiar with the system. But in cases where we need to be more budget conscious, it is an option. So, you know, I don't have the specific number for what that would cost for just between Van Dorn and Landmark, or if we just did weekends or middays, but we can kind of work on a staff level to make sure that we have some options available.
All right, other questions? I'm going to call the question as to, Bonnie, do you want to restate your motion again, or do you wish me to restate it?
Go ahead.
So the motion on the floor is that the DAC will write a letter to City Council supporting restoration of the Route 104 cut so that it can return to 30-minute service as opposed to the proposal with the cut that would be 60-minute service. And we support the line 32 funding in the amount of $850,000 if possible. And we will we'll work out the exact wording for the possible segmenting of that if the entire funding cannot be available.
Sounds good.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposition, abstention? I'll get together with Martin and we will get a letter to council before the April 3rd work session. Thank you all very much for that. All right, now back to Chair Kaplan for a very quick rundown of the actual strategic plan for the ATC as opposed to what we've been talking about here, which is the transit plan per se.
So which is the one that was sent out for review?
Was the
Prior.
transit plan,
Okay, the one that goes to 2030.
yes, which used to be called the AT.
Used to be called the TDP.
TDP, right?
Now it's the BSP.
Right.
And I'm trying to sell the board strategic plan as the BSP.
Martin said,
Board.
David, you'll talk about the BSP. I said, what is that?
Apparently it's not catching on just yet.
Okay.
But I think one thing to help and
Yes, we'll need to do
we
this.
have trouble keeping this straight in our head. The board strategic plan came out of a retreat that the board had in early 2023. And Josh basically pitched us on the idea and said, well, you know, kind of what Dash does in some ways is apparent, because basically the bus shows up when it's supposed to and picks you up and gets you where you're supposed to or it doesn't. But he very much wanted us to set down some things that, especially if there is abrupt change in the organization, it could be on the board side, could be on the staff side, basically it says, what are the things that we're doing? How do we kind of measure excellence? So it has a mission statement, a vision statement, then it has different areas. And it actually was very largely driven by the senior staff at Dash. We had 3 board members who participated in kind of vetting some of it, but a lot of the input of what was there and what was important and how we measure that was staff driven. So actually that's why I want to invite Raymond to talk about some of the specific, kind of at a very high level of the plan. But the way you can kind of keep it straight is the board strategic plan kind of says, what does Dash do? The ATSP is all about what's actually out on the road, the service, how we're kind of getting there and serving the community. So board strategic plan is more kind of an internal document. The ATSP is sort of all of what will tell you what's going to happen now and in the future with the system. So, thanks, Rick.
Thanks, David. So I'll be very, hopefully, brief and concise. So the board strategic plan is a plan that is, it's currently still finalization stages, but it's a plan that sets the goals and expectations between the board of directors and executive leadership team. Essentially serves as the highest altitude you think of the North Star for the organization. It comprises of our mission statement, our mission, our vision, and also what is known as the Dash difference, which is adopted as the value, how we do things within the board strategic plan. And again, this is something that is collaborated within the executive leadership team and adopted and agreed upon by the board. And ultimately, is what the board uses to measure is Dash doing a sufficient and adequate job at what we look for out of Dash. And so, as part of the strategic plan, there are 5 high-level goals that sets the what we look for out of the organization. The first one is system excellence. That talks about that sets the goal for what the system does, what kind of service we run, robust system or coverage or this and that. But it's all about the system, the effectiveness and the efficiency of the system. Goal number 2 is the customer experience, what kind of quality that we expect out of our services. Goal number 3 is environmental stewardship, what type of environmental impact that we wish to make out of the system on the environment and out in this community, both with our fleet, our facilities, and our overall environmental footprint. Goal 4 is our workplace excellence. We want to foster a positive and nurturing work environment that's of high quality, that we can capture and retain the best individuals and professionals and folks who are passionate about what they do. And of course, finally, goal number 5 is fiscal responsibility and efficiency. What type of fiscal strategy and what type of fiscal health do we look for out of the organization? That's essentially the five different goals and their associated themes. That's the top level. The top level is the 5 goals that the board sets for the executive leadership team. And then going down from there, you can think of this as layers. So beyond from the goals, there are a number of objectives that the organization has to meet in order to be successful in those goals. To meet those or to measure those objectives are objective measures. So for example, I'll take a random example, system excellence. If we put in the right bus stops in the right places and measure that's going to be what percentage of our bus stops serves X percentage of a particular demographic with high frequency service, full time, all day, et cetera, and so forth. And then going on from there, that's where it descends below the altitude of the board and descends into the staff level, but also down to the level of the deck. So down from there, that's going to dictate and influence what the staff and the organization does to accomplish various goals. So where the bus goes is a objective. One of the the initiatives to pursue that would be the Alexandria Transit Vision, route restructuring, service adjustments, facility campaigns and stuff like that. That is where staff really spends a lot of its time on, with the involvement and with the feedback from the DAC. And that's where, that's essentially where staff does a lot of its work to achieve its goals. And this is something that's intended to be reviewed and assessed on a yearly basis to gauge the performance of the organization. And nothing in the strategic plan is concrete forever. As we, priorities change over time, and we achieve different levels of success with the goals over time as well. So it's possible that some of these goals might be revisited or changed, over long periods of time. And the activities and initiatives that support those goals, of course, there are constant change in motion. So that's pretty much it as quickly as I can try to summarize it. Are there any questions? That's fantastic.
Thank you, Rim. That was very succinct and to the point. Appreciate it. David, thank you for your attendance. If you wish to stay for the rest of the meeting or you'd like to go, feel free.
I will stay for now. I may look at the bus schedule and but yeah, I wanted to attend one of your meetings for some time, so I'm very interested.
Appreciate your joining us. Okay, let us move on then to the ATSP discussion, the Alexandria Transit Strategic Plan.
Sure.
And Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a great segue because so the board strategic plan, the BSP as I'm going to call it, I'm going to stick with that, actually provides the foundation for the ATSP. So the board strategic plan is set, and that is chapter 1 of the ATSP, the Alexandria Transit Strategic Plan. The ATSP is updated every year. The board strategic plan is more long-term. It's updated every 5 to 10 years as part of that ATSP process. So they are very closely related, and really the board sets the priorities that we are trying to implement here with this ATSP. So yeah, this is basically our annual service plan, which guides and informs our investments, our service changes, our policy and program changes over the following fiscal year in FY25, which starts July 1st, and then the 9 years after that. So this is a 10-year horizon plan. We previously, up until this year, had the Transit Development Plan, the TDP, which was a similar document, had a shorter horizon. It was a 6-year plan, but DRPT, which is the Department of Rail and Public Transit, that's our state agency that provides a lot of our funding. They implemented a new set of requirements for how we plan our service. just to make sure that we're, thinking about all the different angles and certain things. So they had a new requirement, which is now this TSP, the ATSP. And so we have a big thick guidebook for what must be included in the TSP. And so that's what we're following with this new document. But it really essentially serves the same purpose as the TDP. It's really our guide for what our planning in terms of service, fare, and policy changes over the next year. And of course, it's tied to our budget process that we're going through now. So they kind of run parallel, but together. So it is subject to public outreach. We typically bring a draft version of the plan to the board of directors in February or March. And that also marks the start of our public comment period, which usually runs about 2 months or so. We'll have public hearings, we'll have community meetings, we'll have all kinds of pop-up outreach, that kind of thing, to try and get feedback on the plan from the riders, certainly from DAC as well. And then we bring a revised version back to the board at some point, usually April or May, along with all the comments that we receive. We document every single comment we get, provide that to the board so they have that for their information, and they consider it for final adoption, usually in April or May. And the full plan is available on the Dash website, dashbus.com/strategic plan. So that's a good place to start if you're looking for more information on what it includes or how to provide feedback. I'm going to focus mostly on the service changes and probably some of the stuff we talked about earlier. But first, I wanted to mention that one of the new things that the ATSP includes is service standards. So we're not just arbitrarily measuring ridership and on-time performance. We have standards that we're trying to make sure that we are adhering to. So we did back when we developed our Title VI program 2 years ago, the board did adopt some of these standards, but we had to kind of fill in some of the gaps. And so I've highlighted a few of those here. One thing to note is that our routes are broken up here for purposes of this by category. So we have frequent routes, local routes, commuter routes, and the trolley. So the frequent routes are the routes that run every 15 minutes or better all day, 7 days a week. That's our frequent network, lines 31, 35, 36. And then local is all the other 30 series routes that run 7 days a week. For those that are familiar, our 30 series, 30 through 36 are routes that run 7 days a week. Our 100 series are the commuter routes that only run on weekdays. And then our trolley is kind of its own animal, so that's a separate category as well. So what we are showing here is this first table is headway standards. This is the minimum headway standards that we want to achieve. As I mentioned, frequent routes are every 15 minutes all day, 7 days a week. So that's our standard for those. Local is 30 minutes all day, 7 days a week. Previously, we had 60 minutes on off peaks, but based on guidance from the board, based on our feedback from riders, 60-minute service is just not useful service for most people. That's what we're consistently hearing. That's consistent with the ATV. So this is a slight adjustment to our previous standards so that 30 minutes across the board. Commuter routes, 30 during peaks, and trolley is just 15 minutes across the board. The other standard here that I'll highlight is service availability. This was a metric that we started using during the Transit Vision Plan, where we were really looking at the number of people within the city that have close access that can hopefully walk to a bus stop that has frequent all-day service. So it's served by a route that runs every 15 minutes or better all day, 7 days a week. Before we had the new network, on our old network, it was down in the 30s. It was about 30, and actually it was 29%, I think is what the number was. So 29% of residents had access to that level of useful service. With the new network, we're up to about 73%. So a lot more people that can walk to a bus stop that has frequent all-day service. So we've set the minimum standard for within a quarter mile of frequent route is 70%. So hopefully we're going to go up from that 73% we're at right now, but that's the minimum is 70%. And then within a quarter mile of any route, so not just the frequent routes, but just you're within walking distance of a bus stop, we set that at 90%. We're currently at, I think, 97% of people within the city. So we're doing pretty well on both of those. And then I've also just got some other performance standards here. These are more about actual performance of our service in terms of ridership, on-time performance, missed trip percentage, things like that, safety. These are kind of based on a running average of our last 3 to 5 years. Obviously, we want to continue to improve in these areas, but these are at least kind of the minimum standards that we're setting.
Martin, those standards are those strictly Dash, or do they include WMATA as well? Because I was just looking at things like the percentage of the service availability in terms of frequent service within a quarter of a mile. I'm within a quarter of a mile of a WMATA bus route, but not of a dash bus route.
Right.
So I'm just wondering how do you meld the WMATA stuff and the dash stuff, I guess, together?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So on that particular metric, the service availability, that represents both Dash and WMATA, because when we designed the ATV, we were kind of making sure that the networks worked well together.
Okay.
So that would include like the 10A, 10B.
You know, or the 28A or whatever.
Exactly. So yeah, so that 73% that I mentioned does include Metro. Whereas for other things like ridership and efficiency and safety,
it's
that's
strictly
just Dash, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not gonna go into these too much, but just at a high level, we talked about the 104 reduction is, something that we had provided to the city as the if we have to cut something, this would be our top priority. But obviously it's something that we don't want to implement for the reasons that have already been discussed. And then the 3 improvements that we've mentioned, the 32, 34, and the 31. I think Dave did a great job of summarizing these. Are there any other questions on these service changes? I think pretty clear. Okay. We already talked a little bit about this. Again, this is available in the ATSP document if you want to take a look at it. There's actually 2 versions of this table, one that has kind of the cost breakdown. The table was too big to fit on one slide or one page. So, but this is the second page. Okay, so what we talked about up to then was for FY25. I did want to touch on some future years. This is a 10-year plan, although we're really focusing on year 1 and then the next few years after that. So for FY26 and 27, we have a few things that we've identified. In FY26, it's line 30. We continue to hear about Duke Street, and the off-peak service there is 30 minutes. We actually had some folks out there. We were doing some testing on our APCs, our automated passenger counters on line 30 this afternoon. And we specifically picked the midday 30 because it always gets a little crowded. We know there's always going to be boardings there because there's so much demand during off-peak periods for line 30 on Duke Street. It currently runs every 30 minutes. It really, everything seems to indicate that it should be higher every 15 minutes. That's what we recommended in our ATV plan, and that's what we're trying to implement in FY26 when funding becomes available. So that's one of our top priorities for FY26. The 32, we've talked about that in FY25. We're not just happy with going every 30 minutes. We want to be beyond that. I think like we've talked about, the development in that corridor, specifically around Eisenhower Metro, but then also on the west end of the route, really warrants higher service, at least during peak hours. So we've got 15-minute service on that route, hopefully by FY26. 103, 104. These were, like we said, both of those routes ran every 20 minutes prior to the pandemic. We're trying to restore that. That's why this possible reduction is kind of ill-timed. It's taking us in the wrong direction. We want to be restoring service on these routes, especially as more and more people are coming back to those commute patterns. And then the last note on FY26 is that a lot of WMATA's routes, the Metro bus routes, are contingent on WMATA's current Better Bus Network project. This is an ongoing project that WMATA is leading with the jurisdictions from around the region. They're looking to redesign their whole network. They have come up with a couple different scenarios. One is an aspirational long-term network for like 2030 and beyond. They've done 2 rounds of public outreach so far. They're going to be doing another round in the spring here. But so they have a long-term network, and they also have what they're calling a year 1 network. That would be kind of the near term, the first step towards that longer term vision. The intent at this point, from what we understand, is that they would potentially make some of those year 1 changes for FY26. So not the fiscal year coming up in July of this year, but the one after that. And so we may have to kind of, we're coordinating with them. We may have to make some changes in response to that once that kind of gets more solidified. If we do, that would be something that's proposed in FY26.
So do you know, are they planning to change any of the routes that serve Alexandria?
So we were supposed to have a meeting last week, but unfortunately it got rescheduled to this Friday. So we'll have more information then. There were some proposals. I think compared to other jurisdictions, they're relatively minimal. WMATA was closely involved. They were at the table when we were doing our ATV network. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of assumed to be kind of the starting point for their Better Bus Network. They do have some tweaks that they were looking at. you know, I don't think there would be major, I think there was some new routes potentially that would be coming online. But largely the routes, especially the ones that are kind of the core of our network, were mostly intact.
But they're really looking at service cuts or, trying to find additional funding, right? So this doesn't seem like it fits with what I'm reading in the news about WMATA.
Yeah, and I think the year one network was mostly cost neutral.
Okay,
We're still waiting to get details on it, and they're gonna be coming out to the public again with their actual proposed year one network in the coming months. So we'll have more information then, but as I understand, it's mostly cost neutral at this point for obvious reasons.
okay, thank you.
All right, FY 27, I'll touch on this briefly, but 102, we had identified bringing that up to 30 minutes during the middays. To make that more useful, we are actually getting a decent amount of ridership on 102. I think a lot of people are using 102 as a means of getting across the city, whereas when we designed the ATV, we thought that 28A would be the primary way to get from the West End to King Street Metro. Obviously, free fares occurred, and that kind of changed the math on that a little bit for a lot of people. So we are seeing some ridership on 102. So the midday headways would potentially be increased to 30 minutes. And then we have from our ATV plan, again, we have some changes to the trolley that we've identified. Those are still kind of a little bit on the back burner just as we continue to see how other improvements shake out, but we had wanted to extend the trolley from King Street Metro to the Eisenhower Metro to help, serve that area, provide better service, and to extend operating hours into the morning. Currently the trolley only runs from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week, but we would potentially extend it to 6 a.m. so it would start earlier and serve that morning rush. And then the last item for FY 27, the city has been working for quite a number of years on the West End Transitway. This is a enhanced transitway project similar to the Metroway. They want to provide high capacity, highly frequent service on that corridor. We are working with the city right now on the operating plan for the West End Transitway that would determine the final routings, the service levels, and the operator for who would actually run the service, whether that's Dash, WMATA, or another entity. So that is being finalized by mid to late 2024 this year. So whatever comes out of that, it would probably take effect in FY 27, and we may have some resulting changes to our network as a result of that. The Western Transitway basically follows the same alignment as 35 with some differentiation. So it wouldn't just be a one-for-one replacement. We want to make sure that 35 is the areas of 35 that are not served by the Western Transitway would be served by something else. So that's kind of the level of detail we're working through on that. Questions on the FY 26-27 changes?
One quick question. What is the fiscal year? Is it the calendar year or something different? Just so I.
Yes, yeah. So fiscal year, as far as the city of Alexandria is concerned, starts July 1st. So we are currently in FY 24, and then on July 1st, that's the start of FY 25. So this plan, the changes that we were talking about for FY 25, these changes would take place on July 1st or soon thereafter.
Okay, thank you.
So Martin, when you talk about finalize the operating plan for the Western Transitway, is that fiscal year or calendar year 24? You can finish that by June or December.
So that was calendar year. So we're assuming that by summer we should be getting pretty close on that. And then whatever we have would go into next year's ATSP.
So Martin, one question that occurs to me, maybe I missed it somewhere along in my reading. So shelters related to routes. How do we harmonize the city's efforts to build more shelters with the service that Dash hopes to provide? And is anybody actually looking at that holistically, or does one look at one and then looks at another? Oh, you're going to build shelter here, whatever. And has anybody actually assessed whether better shelters would actually drive more ridership of certain lines?
Yeah, so bus stop improvements in general, but specifically accessibility and amenities have been a priority, from the board for staff for a couple of years. And we've made some progress, but not nearly as much as we would like to. So it continues to be a focus. I can tell you that the city is responsible for maintaining the bus stops and the installation of the shelters, but Dash myself and my team, we work very closely with Chris, with Tess. They've been a little bit short-staffed the last few years, not the last few months, but they've just hired someone, so they're gonna be taking that on. But in our coordination with them in the past year, we've been able to develop a bus stop inventory, which gives really good data about all the stops we have, what the amenities are, what their accessibility levels are, if there's improvements that we can make to bring them up to ADA accessibility, whether they have benches, whether they have lighting, whether they're blocked by parking, those types of things. So we have a really good database that we're using for that. We've also been able to input that data into a new platform, so we kind of query the data very easily. So we're taking that, we're working with the city. They've got a couple different grant sources. They've got different funding through the CIP that they receive on a regular basis to maintain shelters, but also to install new ones. So we are working with them to identify what the priorities are. The city has, they've got funding from, gosh, I forget the source. They've had funding for a couple of years to install shelters at up to 40 different locations, new shelters. They've unfortunately had to go through a lot of red tape on that and the NEPA process. So that one's taken longer. But we've also gotten 2 successful applications for state funding for improvements at Landmark. And then also we're hopeful that we're going to get an additional 12 to 15 shelters through DRP state funding. So we've got some funding coming up. The challenge is going to be identifying exactly which stops.
Right, so a key metric, it seems to me here, is how many of these stops are unsheltered at the moment?
Right.
So that as we go from year to year, we have a sense of, are we making progress or not? So what's the number, do you know, offhand?
I believe it's
No, I
just
won't
over
hold it to
20%. I think it's just over 20%. I think in terms of seating, when you include benches, it's closer to 50%. In terms of shelters, I believe it's just over 20%. So we are able to track that through our inventory and through our platform. So as we add new shelters, we can check to see if that number is going up, and we expect that will go up. The last thing I was going to say is that with all this data, we're also able to develop a priority index based on things like ridership, equity, and frequency, so that we can rank the stops in terms of the improvements that we want to do. You know, when funding becomes available, we can identify the top stops that would get the most bang for the buck in terms of making those improvements. So that's what we're working towards with the city. And of course, you know, we're very conscious of the service improvements. We're working with WMATA to make sure that we're not improving stops that WMATA is about to yank their route out of. Because we have limited resources, we need to use them right way. So there's a lot of coordination going on, and I think we're on the precipice of seeing a big increase in the accessibility levels and also the amenities that we have.
Thank you.
I know that's been an issue by your heart. Do you have
You
any-
covered it. You covered it very well.
Okay.
Yeah, the board has. We've been looking at what are barriers to using transit, and certainly the accessibility of a stop is and comfort are huge. And but some of them are, you know, the only thing I would just add is some of them are very challenging. Because think about like King Street in Old Town, one of our top transit core, a traditional shelter is probably not going to be able to fit at most of those stops. And so looking at kind of, and I know Josh has even bandied around some creative solutions of, you know, poles that might have a bench attached to it that can help in there. But there's going to be a lot of, some of the stops will be easier than others, but I think the Dash staff and TNES are working together really well on this. I know Hillary Orr is tired of hearing from us about this, but it's something that is super important, and you guys are doing a great job.
Yeah. And a very minor development that I'm really excited about is that we had not previously been alerted when the city is doing like curb work and they're improving curbs with concrete. We are now looped into that. So when they have the concrete trucks going out there, we can say, hey, there's a bus stop around the corner there. If you just put a little splotches of concrete there, we'll bring it up to ADA accessibility compliance. And so we'll be able to do that much easier now. So hopefully we'll see some improvements.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
One amenity that I think each bus stop should have that I don't see is trash receptacles.
So that was one of the fields or the characteristics that was tracked for the bus stop inventory. So I don't have the stat on the percentage, but we do work with the city to identify if there's additional places that need trash cans.
I think there's some super high traffic bus stops, especially on the 3031 route, that really the difference between having a trash can there and not having a trash can there is night and day. That's actually what came to mind today because I went to the grocery store, Harris Teeter at St. Asaph in Montgomery. And that's what I perceive, of course, without having the data in front of me, what I perceive to be a pretty high profile stop because most people who get their groceries get back on the 30 and 31 there. And because there's no trash can there, there's either, a plastic liner tied to the bus stop that someone, I don't know who does it, but someone does it and it's full of trash. Or unfortunately, there's garbage all over the bus stop because there's a lot of kids that will just throw their trash.
Oh, yeah, definitely over in Landmark.
Landmark was what you're thinking? Okay.
Well, I mean, that, there's quite a few stops that I've seen, because I walk the neighborhood. And without trash or something.
Is it
It'll make a big difference.
Stevenson and
Stevenson, Whiting.
Okay.
Good, thank you. All right, general updates.
All right, let me see, just a quick, I know we're running a little long here, so I will be relatively brief on these. Always like to provide ridership trends, and it's been great news on the ridership front for the last couple of years here, ever since the free fares and the new network. We've seen upticks in ridership. We were the first agency in the region to eclipse pre-pandemic ridership levels, and we have not stopped at that. We've kept going. This graph here shows monthly ridership for the basically last 7 years. It's kind of grouped so that the blue lines are an aggregate of FY17 through 2019. So those are kind of our pre-pandemic baseline in blue. That's the kind of seasonality we would usually see, kind of high in the fall when schools are in session, and then lower in December and January, and then back up in the spring. So that's the blue baseline. Orange is the pandemic. Obviously, we dropped way down. We were at some point down to 20-25% of regular ridership levels, but then we popped right back up in 2022-23. So FY23, as many of you know, was our record year with 4.5 million boardings. So that's shown in green. You can see how we did there. So that was the record. And then now you look at the red line, which is our current fiscal year, FY24, we're just past the halfway point, and we are beating the record so far, with expectation that it'll continue to rise as we get into the spring months. So we are fingers crossed, very optimistic that we'll be able to eclipse the 5 billion boardings mark for the first time in agency history. So very excited to report that. Yeah. And do have some interesting slides to share. As many of you might know, or you might have participated in this, we had a bunch of survey crews out and about on our buses in the fall. It was October, November. We were collecting data about riders, kind of understand who's riding the buses, what are their travel patterns, what are the demographics, what is their overall satisfaction, how are they using Dash. So we got a lot of really good information. This is a survey that we're required to do every 5 years, according to our DRPT, our state agency, as well as the FTA. These were tablets for the most part, where people were asked to fill out their survey. Covered all routes. It was provided in English, Spanish, and Amharic. And we had a very comprehensive data sampling plan that we covered all routes, all time periods, to get a really, really good data set that we can use for future analysis. And we got almost just a hair shy of 3,000 total responses. So I'll just kind of move through these, and feel free to stop me if you have any questions, or if you want to look at something a little more closely. We can also, we for the board, I know we provided handouts, and we can make sure to maybe send this out afterwards if you guys want to take another look at it. This is just overall responses by zip code, by home zip code, which was interesting. It was pretty evenly divided. I think it worked out to about, it was at 37% west of Quaker, and then about 37% east of Quaker, and then about a quarter of the survey respondents were from outside of the city of Alexandria. So pretty evenly split, but a good number from the western part of the town. So these next couple graphs compare the Dash riders versus city residents as a whole, to kind of understand what the differences are. So you can see that in terms of ethnicity, the Dash is shown in the yellow bars. The blue bars are the city overall from the census data. So you can see that the largest percentage of Dash riders are African, or identify as African American or Black. So we have 40% of those, and then compared to 20% of the general population. And then we have Hispanic Latino. 1 in every 4 riders on Dash are Hispanic or Latino, compared to 17% of the general population. And you kind of see some of the other groups as well. But overall, you can see that the Dash as a whole is about 77% minority riders compared to about 50% for the city. So we are serving a very diverse community. Looking at gender, it's pretty much 51-49, give or take. So you can see that there, comparable to the city as a whole. In terms of age, this was kind of interesting. We saw that under 18 years old, only 8% of Dash riders are under 18, whereas 18% of the general population. I think that's generally because the survey was not administered to anyone below the age of 13. So you probably not having not a fair comparison probably. In terms of 65 plus, only 5% of riders were 65 plus, whereas 13% of general population. That was a little lower than I expected, the 5%. But that's what the data showed us.
I'm sorry, Martin, you said which color represent which?
Sorry, yellow is Dash.
Yellow is Dash,
And then
okay,
blue is
thank
the city
you.
as a whole. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So we reported lower percentage of senior riders than the city as a whole.
So this, where the dash is higher is what?
So that's age, so that's 25 to 34. So 26% of Dash riders were between the ages of 25 and 34, compared to 19% for the city.
Okay, thank you.
This is just the demographics data for the survey that you were talking about, the 3,000 respondents.
Correct.
Okay, correct. Okay.
Okay, income. So this is grouped, this is household income. So you can see the yellow bars show the Dash incomes. The dotted line is the low income thresholds. You can see that 66%, so 2/3 of Dash riders are below that low income threshold. And then you can see with the rest of the city, you know, the distribution is much higher. You know, actually 2/3 are above. I think what was the breakdown here? 40. I think about 2/3 are above 75K. So it's kind of a flip flop. So we are serving a lot of low income riders, which is great.
But that's by design. That's how you designed the
That's how
system.
you design, yep. So when we designed our system, I think I mentioned the service availability, we were measuring the percentage of residents that were within a quarter mile of frequent service. Like we said, 73% of all residents are within a quarter mile of that service. It's much higher for low income. I think it's 87%, I want to say, it's in the 80s. So we are really serving low income communities very well in terms of our frequent service. Primary language. So 95% of Dash bus riders speak English well or very well. Admittedly, that could be, you know, the survey was administered randomly. It was by, you know, the surveyors would get random numbers, and so they would be required to ask like the third person aboard. So it wasn't based on just people who looked approachable or looked like they spoke English, but we did see that 95% of riders spoke English well or very well. The next closest was Spanish in terms of primary language. 19% of Dash riders speak Spanish as their primary language at home. So Amharic and Arabic were the other two. Traditionally, we've focused on Spanish and Amharic as our two alternate languages. You know, this suggests that maybe Arabic is another one that we could look at. I think when we break it down a little bit more, we have the ability to look at this by route. I think if you look at a route like the 35, it has other languages like Dari and Pashto we've heard. I know Salma was advocating for.
It's very much advocating for that. Our
Yeah.
student member, because she lives in that area and says almost everybody in her bus route in the West End was speaking Dari. Right, because of the Afghan refugees that have come in over the last several years.
Right. So this will be very helpful for informing our outreach, you know, how we would do that, you know, and certainly if we're having a certain campaign that we're doing for 35 riders, we would, you know, take that and try and translate. So now we're getting into the route by route breakdown. And this just tries to highlight, you know, the routes that have a higher percentage of low income riders or higher percentage of minority riders. You can see that the 30, the 35, 36 are among the higher, and the 32 are among the higher percentage of minority riders. Our low income routes are really the 30 to 35 and the 102. So some really good data here. If you're interested at more route level data, if you go to the ATSP, the website dashbus.com/strategic plan, I think it's Appendix A of that document, has these route profile pages, which are really interesting. It goes route by route and shows you the breakdown, language, income, ethnicity for each route. So it's really, really interesting to look through that if you have a route you're trying to learn more about. All right, let me get through some of these a little quickly. Number of days using Dash per week. So we've got, you know, what is it? 59% of our riders are using Dash at least 4 days a week. So almost 60% of our riders are very frequent riders, which is great. Then we've got just some questions about free fares. We always want to find out, you know, we've got these record ridership growth. What's contributing? What factors are most important? Free fares is often cited as one of the most important ones, and it turns out that it is a big deal. So this one is kind of broken down in a couple different questions. First is, did you ride Dash before free fares in the new network? So back in September 2021, did you ride before then? 53% said no. They had started riding in the last couple of years since free fares. So for those respondents, we asked them a follow-up question: did the introduction of free fares affect your decision to start using Dash? And 62% said yes, it did. So pretty strong influence on new riders. In terms of people that were riding before the new network was launched, 47% of respondents said they were riding Dash before free fares, before the new network. Among that group, we asked them, are you riding Dash more or less since the introduction of free fares? 53% said they were riding more. So pretty good evidence, pretty strong evidence that free fares are having a strong impact on not only drawing in new riders, but also influencing existing riders to ride Dash more often. And I think this is the second to last one. Most important factors in riding Dash, choose up to 3. So what are the biggest factors determining whether or not you're going to use Dash for a trip or in general? And we asked that question, and the number one answer was free fares. Almost 60% of people included that as one of their 3 responses. I think the actual title was affordability or free fares. And so we got a lot of response on that. Routes that go where they need to go, reliability and frequency were the next couple responses. Is that kind of, I'm curious what the response is among this group. Does that line up with what your responses would be? Are there factors in here that are higher or lower than you would think, or?
I think that those would jive with what my perception of this would be. I think those makes a lot of sense.
I'll admit, I was a little surprised frequency was where it was, because when we've previously done this survey, frequency has been kind of towards the top. It was a little lower here. I don't know if that was because of the way the question was worded or what, but I was curious about that.
I would have said frequency and routes.
Yeah.
How were you differentiating reliability and frequency in the survey? Do you recall?
I think it was just, we didn't provide like a detailed explanation, because they're having to, when they're reading off the questions, they're having to kind of read through it. And so it was just kind of 1 or 2 words for most of these. I think it was just reliability. The bus comes when it's supposed to come, I think was kind of the understanding there. Whereas frequency is just, you know, having a lot of trips, more trips.
When I was surveyed, that's how it was, where reliability was whether or not, you know, it shows up when it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So you did get surveyed?
Yeah, I got
Sure, I got
surveyed,
surveyed too.
yes, yeah. It was in Old Town though, so there's definitely a lot of surveyors in those 2 months, so I had to keep telling them, I was like, I don't want to repeat ever.
That's good to hear. All right, and the last one is just overall satisfaction with Dash service. Was very happy to see that, you know, 95% were satisfied, with 79% being very satisfied with Dash service overall. So very happy to see that. And I should note that this is just a small sampling of the questions. There were 37 questions, so we have a lot more data. We can, you know, slice and dice it any way we like. So if there's anything that jumped out as you as something that you'd like to learn more about, you know, just let me know, or if you have questions, I can dig into them.
Quick clarification for the last one, with this, it was just choose up to 3. Okay, never mind. I see it in the title now. I was curious if they could just choose, you know, a minimum of 3 and then as many as they wanted, or if it's just up to 3. So I guess that makes sense. I was going to say that cleanliness seems a little low, because when I bring family and friends and, you know, whatnot from Oklahoma, of course, that's something that they're shocked about, is, you know, alongside the routes and reliability, is the fact that all the buses are super clean and everybody takes care of the buses and whatnot. But I guess it's not as important as free fares, so I get it.
I will say one thing, I don't know if other people have this perception, but riding the Dash, I always perceive the bus drivers to be much kinder than the WMATA drivers. Like they say hi, my wife used to take, I can't remember which one, to work. And they used to actually, if she was the only one on the bus, drive her to her, like to the office. I don't know if that's gonna get somebody in trouble. I don't remember who it was, but instead of to the bus stop, they would take her closer and drop her off. So I mean, I'm not surprised that people are satisfied with the Dash.
Whenever I go to community meetings, those are the two things I hear is clean buses and really friendly drivers, so.
Drivers are the best. Quick question, not related to this, but do we have courtesy stops for Dash? Like at night, is that a thing in the Dash network? Because I know.
I'm 95% sure that yes, we do allow for courtesy stops, is that?
Officially, no.
Sorry, official versus.
Officially, no, but we do acknowledge the work. We've been watching this. Vermont has, it's either piloted or just they just implemented, they do courtesy stops after 9 p.m., even within here in Alexandria. So
Okay,
we've been-
so that's why I have that idea in my head. It was Somata that started putting the signs up. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Martin. That's great. Noah, do you have anything you want to update us on?
No, not really. First, I wanted to thank everyone who attended the 40th event. It was a lot of work, but we really enjoyed, and it was great meeting everyone. We are definitely gonna send an email with photos, with the link to the video. We did a lot of pop-ups that week, and I know a lot of you volunteered, so thank you so much for that. We had a great turnaround, and yeah, very excited for what's next.
Great, thank you. So we routinely, as part of our meeting, have an open forum piece where anyone can raise a particular issue. And I know that one of the issues that is going to be raised tonight, I was going to raise it, but Jim has already done even better than I have, which is the King and Bradley Center planning activity. For those of you who know that area, it is a mess, to say, in terms of its present configuration, and the city has been busy trying to reconfigure the area. So I'm gonna, since Jim is a big proponent of this, I want to turn it to him to explain where we are in this process. The city still has a few more dates, right?
March
Before
30th is the deadline for the current, and what I believe is the final comment. period.
final comment, March 30th. Okay, thank you.
How many of you know about the King Bradley road segment redesign? Bonnie and me and Ross.
Not familiar with it.
Phoebe did not, okay. So, and from your geographic locations where you live, you may not be familiar with it, but basically it's a 4-lane section of King Street, Route 7, and a I guess 3-ish lane service road in front of the Bradley service road. We're talking about the section from Breakup Lane west to Minot. The city, a priori, made a decision not to change the main road on King Street. There are some of us who are dedicated bus lane advocates who would have liked to have seen that, but it's not part of the city plan, and they didn't take that on. So the main 4 lanes of King Street with turn lanes is going to remain essentially unchanged, maybe some crosswalk. So the discussion, and they've had community meetings, what's wrong with this section. They've said here are potential solutions, and now they're saying here are our 3 alternatives to address the number 1 problem in this service road corridor is pedestrian safety. And I'll give Bonnie a chance to talk about it later, since there's a Safeway there next to Bradley Shopping Center where she shops, and several of us use the Bradley Shopping Center. And there's 3 alternatives. And I'll speak to alternative 2. And I probably can't see this other than there's a red line.
Pass it around.
Yeah.
At this point. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go.
There's a red line. If you call up the open house presentation, Martin. Alternative 2 basically is the only one that has a dedicated bus lane. So alternative 2 and 3 both would turn that service road into 2 lanes one way. I'm sorry. alternative be one lane, one way, so buses and cars would share a lane. But alternative two would make one of two lanes a dedicated bus lane westbound. And
There we go.
One sec, sorry.
Do we have the right concepts?
There it is.
Here we go. Okay.
yeah, that's what I was passing around. So you see the main thoroughfare remains the same. And so we're just talking about how do people get on and off the bus? How do they cross over to the shopping center from the bus? The eastbound buses would use the main King Street lanes and access that bus stop shown in that picture. But the westbound bus would have its own dedicated lane. And there are a lot of turning movements for cars in and out of that shopping center. And so isolating the bus from those turning movements, giving it its own dedicated lane, I think would be one step up from the other improvements that are proposed. So depending on questions and comments, I'd like to make a motion that the DAC consider a letter to City Director of Transportation Environmental Services, who's running this project, to support alternative two on behalf of the Dash Advisory Committee as providing the best bus rider experience. Most reliable from a dedicated lane. Bonnie, do you have other comments and questions?
Well,
You attended the open house, right?
I did. I would just say that there's just a lot of moving parts trying to walk through there. If you're walking along King Street, there's just driveway after driveway after driveway that you have to negotiate to get across. And, you know, crossing, if you get off the bus, for example, at Minoken, there's no crosswalk to get across the service road to get to, you know, to walk up Minoken. And the other problem that I see is that if you go to the Safeway, the grocery store, you can get off the bus right in front of the Safeway, but if you're going west, you have to cross the service road and walk up to the McDonald's, which is probably, what, maybe 2.5 blocks, to be able to catch the bus going west. So that's, I think, something that needs to be addressed. I don't know if this plan will address that. I don't think all the details have been worked out, but the other issue is that the buses on that service road are really, really slow. And it's because of all the turning traffic that's going in and out of that shopping center. And then there's several traffic lights that sort of, you know, deal with that turning traffic. So it just takes forever. There are times when I've gotten off, when I've walked down King Street from Minoken and walked up to the Safeway and beat the bus. So, you know, I don't walk all that fast. So yeah, I support Jim's motion.
Just getting back to what Bonnie was talking about here, are like for this alternative two, I'm wondering, you're basically talking about buses operating on current general service or the general roadway, right? Rather than necessarily on the
For the eastbound.
for the eastbound. Now, how would people that were going to the Safeway coming along on the 36 or whatever, get up, where would they get off on if they were going eastbound? That, or is there going to be another bus route or another bus stop or something? Because that doesn't really come clear to me.
I think that's one of the details Bonnie's talking about. They haven't worked out to whether or not there'd be a further on bus stop near the Safeway.
Yeah, that's my problem, because I know I've used that bus, that Safeway a number of times, and currently it's not good, but but I'm especially coming eastbound. That's a detail that really has to be worked out.
The thing that I find strange, which is typical of the way the city sometimes plans, is Bradley is about to undergo a major renovation. The developers are
Oh, really?
are planning to do something quite different, radical.
Really?
at Bradley,
Really?
yes.
Hmm.
So the question is, why are we doing this now
Yeah.
until we know what the actual tenants and the layout of Bradley's gonna look like
Yeah, that's true.
in another couple of years?
It's interesting. Okay.
I think it's a great question. And,
I mean,
but the issue right now is it's a heavily used bus stop as well. It's really sees a lot of services served by 3 lines, basically, right? The 31, 36A, and 36B. And so I think there's some immediate issues. And let's say we're to redevelop into multifamily residential. Then I think that puts even a higher premium on having a dedicated bus lane in at least one direction. And the other, I haven't talked about it. I know Nathaniel mentioned he rode his bike here. There's, I think, a 2-way cycle track is part of this. It's separated from the pedestrian walkway as part of this, that I think is part of both alternatives 2 and 3. As I say, the thing that sets apart alternative 2 is the dedicated bus lane. And I thought this group might endorse that concept if the developer.
Remind the folks, though, I think in fairness, what alternative 1 and alternative 3
Yeah.
are, right? So that we're.
Yeah, absolutely.
The others who are just new to this are.
Alternative 1 has 2-way traffic and has the buses sharing the lanes with cars.
it's
Which is
correct.
kind of the
Basically
same as what
way
it
as
is.
Yeah.
Right.
now.
As
Basically-
today, yeah.
Yeah.
So think of alternative 1 as Bonnie can outwalk the bus. Alternative 3 is 1-way traffic in I believe that's 1 shared lane.
Correct. Yep.
So they make the median wider.
Yep.
You know, it's just my opinion. I'm not sure why that would make a lot of sense. It means every car is gonna stop behind the bus, every bus is gonna stop behind every turning car.
Yeah.
So, but thank you, Ross. It's
Yeah.
important to always look at all 3 alternatives and pros and cons of each.
Yeah, they-
I mean, there's a little bit of thought, I think, in transit that when you have less lanes, you have less traffic because less people want to deal with it, but, you know, I don't know. Like, that's the only rationale I could come with.
The other thing that though, I guess as a person that's been working on this stuff for a long time, I know that the property owner of Bradley's is, I think we came up with basically we wanted to develop like a dedicated transit little mall or roadway in right where we've got the current bus stop. But the property owner said, no way in hell do we want that. We want to continue to have double or 2-way traffic. So I'm not sure where the current owner is or how is the current owner is thinking, but you know, having 1-way traffic would probably not be something that the owner would go with unless they've got a completely different idea. But I remember from you know, several years ago when they came up with this thing that it was like, oh no, we don't want to do that. So yes.
Has the present ownership opined on the?
I have no idea what the.
Bonnie, do you know?
I've not heard anything at all.
No, and I
Curious.
just. Well, I think that's interesting. The owner may or may not want to
Yeah,
see improved pedestrian access to his facility.
right, yeah, or messing around with his
You know, but
bus-
if you think
his
about the
bus-
city of Alexandria
yeah.
and the general trends, you
Yeah.
know, look at Landmark Mall. That
Yeah.
is one massive parking lot that's gonna be a very walkable
Oh, yeah,
community.
yeah,
This is a massive strip mall.
yeah,
And so I hope it redevelops,
yeah,
but that shouldn't stand in the way of improving the bus
yeah.
facility we have now. And as you notice, as Martin went through alternative 2 and 3, that eastbound bus,
Mhm.
whatever's going on in alternative 2 and 3 for the eastbound bus is the same. So I think they still have the issue, are they gonna put the bus stop in safely?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Can I ask whether Dash has actually taken a position on this?
Funny you should ask. Yes, so we've been really involved with the city from the start on this. You know, we pushing for a little bit more, and we were able to get the dedicated lane scenario in here, which I think would be great. You know, as has been mentioned, this corridor A has some of our most frequent routes are going through here. I think WMATA, when their better bus network comes out, there's going to be additional WMATA service here. So we are looking at potentially a bus every 3 to 5 minutes through this corridor in the future in both directions. Lots of ridership obviously going along with that, but also lots of delay. Like Bonnie mentioned, like the way the signals are set up, the way we have to kind of go in and out of the service lane today, it just takes so much time, and it's probably one of the biggest, the slowest sections that we have in our system. So if we could wave a wand and pick a segment in our system, it'd be a toss-up between this and Telegraph, I think. They're both pretty bad. So I think in terms of a place for investment, this is a perfect place to do it. And I think probably goes without saying that dedicated bus lanes provide the most benefits in terms of we're gonna have one bite at this apple in the next few years here. This is the bite at the apple. You know, we want to make sure that we're improving the current conditions over what they are, improving upon the current conditions. This does that. We're going to have some more stats in terms of travel time savings, in terms of the number of throughput, the passenger throughput we would get with these scenarios. But I think, you know, safe to say that alternative two.
We talked before about riders valuing reliability.
Right.
And this is again, next to Telegraph, the biggest disruptor to reliability, meeting on time arrivals and departures for 3 different dash bus lines.
Right.
So may I suggest, if we are going to send a letter, since we have many of our members not here and probably not well educated on this topic, that if we do a letter, it probably needs to go with a cover note that goes through some of the highlights of why we believe this alternative is important from the point of view of the DAC, and also, if you will, from the point of view of the DASH system itself.
Sure.
So that those who aren't present this evening, when they have to vote on this letter, we give them an education, if you will. That would be my suggestion, because otherwise, I'm afraid those who are not here, when we circulate the letter for approval, which is normally the process that we go through, we ask for comments and approval at the same time. I'm afraid a number of them may well raise objections, simply out of ignorance.
The other thing, I guess, in terms of the alternative two is getting, how would buses on the east side or the east running buses, how would they get into that for that bay in front of the Safeway?
So
what is the traffic flow from Quaker Lane to
you westbound?
That'd be
What's
west.
that?
Westbound, you mean?
Yeah, westbound,
Okay.
yeah, the westbound.
Yeah, so that's, these designs are pretty preliminary. It's kind of at a concept level. The
Right.
exact details of that we worked out, but you know, I've been in 4 meetings over the last 2 weeks on this project, working on kind of how we would do that. But and one of the topics we're talking about is Safeway, because Safeway is not really well
Yeah.
served, as we mentioned.
Yeah.
We're looking at, is there a way to get the buses into, you know, the westbound buses
Yeah,
over into the
exactly.
service lane
Yeah.
earlier so they could stop at Safeway in both directions.
Right.
There are some ways that we could do that. We're still trying to work with the consultants to figure out if there's a safe way to do that. No pun intended.
So to speak.
But they would have to, we're not, the scope of this project does not touch the 5 points intersection, so the
Oh,
Quaker
okay.
intersection.
Dysfunction junction, as it's well
Is that what
known
it is? I
as.
hadn't heard that one before. But so there could be a future scenario that deals with that, but it's not this project, so it would just have to be you know, some way of getting the buses, maybe a new left turn for buses only, somewhere in there, that kind of gets them into the service lane. So we're working on that, but that's certainly one of the considerations. As it stands now, if we don't have that, it would be the same pattern that we have today, which is not ideal. And I should note that one of the challenges here is that we have buses that stop and wait for a few minutes. So we're working on making sure the final design has ways that the buses could wait and have other buses go around them. So what you see here is not what the final design would look like.
Still majority rules under rules.
And I'll just quickly plug, in addition to the letter, there is the form that I think you mentioned. So if you want to, on your own volition, go to the website, we can send that link out as well.
All right, do we have a motion?
Bonnie seconded.
I did.
Okay. We've had discussion. I'm gonna call the question. All in favor of sending a letter to the Department of Transportation and Environmental Services related to option 2? Please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No, I'm either opposed or abstaining because there are too many questions here that's in my mind.
All right, we'll register you as an abstention.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay. So what I am going to propose here is that we do follow our pattern and send this letter out for comment and approval. Our bylaws now have been changed that because of a controversy that happened several years ago, that majority rule happens on letters. So it will be a simple majority. It isn't a super majority, it's a simple majority. Who vote in favor, the letter goes out. If there is not a majority, the letter does not go out, and you're all encouraged to individually comment through the system. Thank you. Anything else in the open forum? I know we're running very late. I expected this meeting to be till almost 7:30 today, but
And
we're
it
almost
is.
there. It's almost there. Anything else that anybody else wants to raise here in the open forum?
Support for this, so if you.
Otherwise, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
I have one topic that.
Please, go ahead.
That'd be great.
I feel like one thing that's not super clear to people who don't use it, and maybe this is just because I have a young son right now. But I
Right.
see a lot of people in my neighborhood bringing strollers on, and people don't know how to use the handicap thing, and so they're either blocking the aisle
Yeah.
or they're not dealing with like putting the seats up so that they have a place for the stroller to be for a little while. I see that a lot on weekend usage.
Mhm.
I don't ever see that during like rush hour or like busy times, but
Right.
on the weekend I see that happening, so.
Yes.
I don't know that we have to dive into anything there, but just something that. I
Strollers are
see.
becoming a big problem.
Yeah.
Like on Route 30, you wind up with strollers on every other bus sometimes.
Yeah, 34, we see it a lot.
I'll let the staff note that and
We've definitely been hearing that, and we're working internally on campaigns and ways to address that, because we did change our stroller policy about a year and a half ago to be more accommodating to strollers, but it has had some effects, especially with more riders. So.
Yeah, every once in a while I see shopping carts too, like the laundry size carts come on. Yeah.
As the policy is written, they're supposed to be, they're allowed to, they don't have to be folded like they used to be, but they do have to be out of the aisle, so they're not blocking, they have to be wheels locked, child secured, and the parent has to be holding the stroller at all times. So we just need to, I think, put out some reminders and make sure everybody knows what the policy is.
okay, before I go for adjournment, there's one other thing. We didn't approve the minutes from the last meeting for those who attended the last meeting.
I move approval.
Mayor, second. All in favor? Aye. All right, minutes are approved. So 2 action items therefore coming out of this meeting. One is you will see a letter related to the budget. And so that we can get that letter in a timely fashion to the city council before they meet on April 3rd. And the second is before the March 30th deadline, hopefully before, this letter related to the Bradley and King Street modifications. So look in your inbox, you should get that hopefully in the next week at the latest.
Well, thank you. I know that means work for you, so
Yeah,
thank you.
right. From Martin and I and a bunch of other people. We'll get it done. And thanks to the new members. Welcome again. Appreciate it. Motion to adjourn.
Also move.
Okay,
Second.
all right. Thank you all for attending this evening.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.